Okay, welcome Fabio Balducci from Sapienza University. Özge Guvanci, who is PhD candidate and research assistant at the Department of Architecture of Özge, is going to introduce Fabio Balducci. If you want to pose a question to the speaker, you might do so by writing in the chat or raising your hand. We will pick up all those questions at the end of the lecture. If you want, at that time, you can turn on your microphone or camera and talk directly. So at the end of the lecture, we're going to have a discussion. We have students from are online. We have students from we have some international guests from different countries, Iran, Morocco. We have somebody from Turkey as well. And I think I can pass the floor to Özge.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Can you hear me? Yeah. Our guest lecturer today is Fabio Balducci. He's an architect, PhD graduated in Rome in 2009, and he's a member of the Order of Architects, Planners, and Landscape Commerce of Rome and Rome section since March 2011. In 2014, he won the PhD scholarship. What happened? I'm screen sharing. What happened? I can't do anything. Nothing works.
It's a two screen because we have
No.
now.
Let's go back to the meeting now.
That's okay.
But it's not okay for me. Okay, I can't see it at the same time.
Leave it without the screen. Yeah.
And since 2013, he participated in the teaching at the faculty as co-supervisor in the thesis work conducted by Orazio Carpenzano, and since 2017, with Paolo Marcaldi, he has been the owner of the Studio di Sponsora, through which he has the opportunity to explore the dimension of the project at different scales and to open a close comparison between theory and practice in architecture. And recent work by the studio in participations in design competition and the design of the Federico Fellini Museum in Rimini, inaugurated in August 2021. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And see me? Okay, I'm trying to, hello, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I don't remember how to shrink this panel. No. Guys, do you know how to shrink this panel?
Can you share only the file that you want to show us instead of sharing the entire screen?
Okay, let me check. Is it okay?
Yes, yes.
Can you see when I change the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, okay, but still. Okay, you don't see the bar, okay? Really?
No, we don't see that. We see only the present.
Okay, only the presentation. So it works for me. So good morning, everyone, and thank you to Professor Kamitz, Özge, and all of the assistants and tutors for the invitation to deliver this lecture in his course. This lecture will focus on the theme of the reinvention of the city, presenting the example of some projects in which I have been involved in recent years, and using these examples as an instrumental way to show that what is the approach of the school of my teacher, Professor Orazio Carpenzano, which is now Dean of the Faculty of Architecture at Sapienza, when we deal with the theme of heritage. This notion of heritage is central for both Italian and Turkish cities, as its roots in the history of our cultures, but should always be understood as a thrust towards the future. In the very etymological root of the word lies the idea of something that has to be handed down between generations, renewing a pact of care, protection, and transfer of tangible and intangible assets. Because we also know from UNESCO that the notion of heritage concerns both the material of which man's work are made and the uses, rites, and myths of the civilizations that produce these physical deposits on the Earth's soil. Among these deposits, one of the main ones is obviously architecture, which plays a central role in the theme of heritage, both material and immaterial. Through design, it can intervene in the protection, valorization, and transfer of the legacies that history has handed down to us from one generation to the next. And this is why we can do both by inventing new architecture and by working to preserve and renew the existing ones. So I would like to enter this notion of restoration and by paying tribute here to one of the fathers of modern restoration theory, Professor Giovanni Carbonara, who passed away just over a month ago, to whom this virtual classroom is dedicated. Giovanni Carbonara, through a tireless theoretical and practical activity, expressed in a monumental multi-volume treatise on the subject of architectural restoration, contributed to freeing the theory from any possible imitative temptation of the past, invoking the intervention of a creativity is exercised only through an in-depth knowledge of the good to be handed down, favoring a happy contamination between conservation and innovation, which would refer to the three fundamental values of truth, authenticity, and distinguishability of interventions. So, all the projects I will show you today base their logical assumption on these themes, although they are not exclusively restoration projects. In the examples that follow, we always intervene on a material asset, even if these artifacts have different degrees of importance from a qualitative point of view, through an architectural interventions that uses the language of modernity to approach history and make the pre-existence function better, adapting its uses to contemporary expectations and determining from the juxtaposition of history and the future new figures. Fantastic, but at the same time strongly rooted in the place and culture to which they belong. The first project I'm showing you is also the one in which I had the honor of collaborating with Giovanni Carbonara, who was involved in the group as a consultant for the restoration. It is the competition proposal for the regeneration of a large building known as Ex Galateo, which is a former hospital structure now abandoned in the city of Lecce. And this building is meant to be recovered into and renovated and redesigned as a housing structure according to the principle of co-housing, offering an interesting mixité with spaces open to the public for commercial, cultural, and recreational uses. The ex-Galateo building is located in Lecce, a city in Apulia, located into the Salento Peninsula, characterized by a historical center extensively transformed during the Baroque period. The building was built during the fascist period for the treatment of tuberculosis patients by Pierluigi Nervi, the greatest engineer of the 20th century in Italy and one of the most important internationally, and is today in a serious state of neglect. As can be seen from this picture, the large building is located into an open area to the south of the historic city center, which is oriented and open to the natural landscape for health reasons. The system, which incorporates architecture and nature together, was later separated from the city by the completion of the so-called ring road, which over time became a ring with intense city traffic. The layout of the complex is articulated on a rigorous symmetry set on a long barycentric building body that governs the distribution system and connects the two main fronts, opposed into an interesting duality, intertwining scale and figurative language. We can see the north elevation is a sort of Beaux-Arts building, and the southern elevation is a modernist language. This is the retro, which is facing the park, and is characterized both, I must say, characterized by the wide, deep verandas that cut into the flat, long, modernist facade, at the same time enlivened by the sinuous profiles of the electric shutters that we saw here in these pictures. And the quality of the original architectural features is now compromised, particularly in the southern front, altered to the end of the 90s for a hospital-type functional transformation. In this project scheme, designed by Carbonara itself, all the planned interventions are condensed. A new articulation of the relationship of sense and form between urban and conformation and building is proposed, deriving from a critical assembly of the architectural components and the contextual exchange between building and the city. A strengthening of the system of open areas to the historic city obtained through theories of porticos, this one, numbered 2, I was saying that they frame the dynamic disarray of the internal gardens, which is named 1, to define new links between the environmental infrastructure of the park and the building complex. The proposal, working through controlled subtractions and deferred additions, aims to the definition of a system of relations that leaves intact the primary plasticity of the ex-Galateo in its volumetric articulation, to focus the interaction between the monument and its contexts, enhancing the characteristics of permeability and strong interaction between internal and external spaces that distinguishes the sanatorium complexes of the early 20th century. The complex fence, partly transformed into a wall inhabited by spaces destined for small commercial facilities, number 6, 5, and 4, reinforces the emergence of the urban figure and makes the idea of the context coincide with that of the architectural body. In the two courtyards that porticos determine on the sides of the building, now occupied by external emergency stairs and other superfetations that will be demolished. A theory of highly ecologically efficient vegetated spaces adorned with shrubs, fruit trees, and 2 meters of water for climatic mitigation is planned. Inside the garden, enclosed by the tree frame, is another open enclosure, the mineral carpet, this one, which was number 3 here, of the square in the front of the urban front, marks another interior within the existing space. The new configuration aims at defining a different balance in the entire territorial system, with explicit effects both on the potential attractiveness for buyers or tenants of the new housing and for the users for collective spaces. In the spaces that complete the residential functions dedicated to public and collective activities, welcoming and flexible areas for socially are inserted, where as art workshops, readings, and co-working spaces can be located, which can also be further defined by the activating virtuous processes of participation promoted by the administration building. And the involving citizenship, civic associations, and the third section. So this is the new image of the front scene of the building, as you can see. And this is the retro facade. The one is open to the park with a large frame, where a large frame overrides the long facade of the verandas, extending the usable surfaces and modeling 3 main warpings. The trilithic cage, consisting of a system of double vertical uprights joined by horizontal coplanar joints. The horizontal texture of the floors, which dominate the advancement of the vertical structure in the background. The texture of the facades set back from the verandas, marked by an accelerated scansion of the jealousy screens interposed between the trilithon and the facade. The trilithic system thus becomes the ordering element, almost a pentagram, in which the restored figure of the original building is inscribed. So the project here relates to the modern and contemporary tradition, both in the theory of the regeneration of building fronts, as in the famous project for Bordeaux by Lacaton and Vassal, and in the compositional one, which is inscribed in the theme dear to Italian rationalism of the trilithic facade frame. So from this operation springs the new front, that is a symbolic combination of the existing and the new. A game of crossfades between the abstract rationalist language and the dynamic force of modernism in its local declination. In this biunivocity, the proposal seeks to achieve a sort of recomposition of the dual condition from which the artifact originates, a fully rationalist modernism that still cohabits with the Beaux-Arts laws of symmetry and its decorative devices. The new verandas, enlivened by hanging gardens with fruit trees, represent a contemporary declination of the sanatorium solarium, mediating spaces in which to enjoy the benefits of nature in all seasons and climatic conditions. And this is the second project I want to show you. And it is again a competition project in which I participated through the studio I was directing at the time together with Paolo Marqualdi. It concerns the recovery, restoration, and refunctioning for museum and hospital purposes of the Santa Maria del Popolo complex in Naples. Here too, as in the case of Lecce, the architectural project is combined in a structural coupling with that of restoration to define the parameters of a physical and functional renovation of historical assets. So as you can see, this is a monumental building complex on the edge of the historic center of Naples, Italy's second largest city, which shares many things with Istanbul. They are both port cities, cosmopolitan and chaotic, with rugged and surprising orography. This hospital, named Ospedale degli Incurabili, is considered the oldest hospital in Europe. Its construction dates back to the 16th century at the height of Renaissance period, and among many other treasures, it houses the 18th century pharmacy created by Bartolomeo Vecchione, which has an extraordinary period shelving and 400 maiolica vases. The hospital is temporarily closed to the disruptions to the structure, as you can see in these pictures. The Cerusico Medical College and the Napoletano Medical School were founded here. And like Lecce, Naples is a fully Baroque city, where the staging of architecture becomes the protagonist for a space designed for representative uses in a highly theatrical setting. To this imprint is added an ever older one that sinks its imagery into the bowels of the earth, into that subterranean dimension from which emerges all the plastic strength of great excavated masses, of a space that works by subtraction of matter through slow, heavy, tiring sometimes, and dramatic work. The theme of movement, that of the transition of bodies, a new idea of mass in which the wall is no longer conceived as the flat delimitation of a structure. Rather, it becomes an element where consistency, gravity, mightiness elevated to representational pathos is made manifest. The dramatic use of light contrasts and breaks up the unity of the figure, a premise for the dissolution of boundaries between artistic genres. Nature and architecture also merge in striking hybrids in garden architecture for ecclesiastical complexes, royal palaces, or projects for major social and scientific functions, such as hospitals or botanical gardens. In all cases, we see the celebration of unusual perspectives, the ascension of facades often used as crowning glory for a monumental shelf base. In this sort of transition between the living, organic world and the building, we are transported from the chaotic freedom of the world to the marvelous, albeit anti-Cartesian, order in which people organize their living spaces. And through the words of Pareison, who defines artistic action as a battle waged against matter, the project thus aims to make that duality manifest. The suspended time of recovery from illness finds its counterpoint into indefinite time of the art objects, understood as an element capable of defying deaths, thanks to its permanence through the generations. The salvific action of the art offers to perishable matter, thus because it becomes the lens through which we approach the difficult theme of restoration, redevelopment, and functional regeneration of the complesso degli incurabili. From the Baroque conception of space and architectural surfaces mentioned earlier, the project distills the theme of expressive disproportion with a more domestic measure of its component parts. The selected graphs ensures the relations through which the project overrides the relationships between the parts of the complex, and of its work with the vast dimension of the city help to identify, making it evident, the poetic code of the entire regeneration works. And of course, this is also a project of mere restoration, but it is very complex, and I must go on with this picture because otherwise it will take so much time to explain. you just have to know that the project sets the articulated functional program on the generating force of the system of the 3 internal courtyards that you can see in this picture, the first one, second one, and the third one, which define the intimate and protected relationship between the open spaces and the interior spaces of the building complex. So the project will have to express itself by ordering the completions, reintegrations, and additions that have taken place over the centuries. In this constructive dialogue with the existing, the choices that will characterize the material, structural, spatial, and formal aspects of the project will be oriented towards the reintegration of the corrupted or lost image according to principles and modalities appropriate to the different contexts of which the complex is composed. As mentioned, the courtyards are re-inhabited and become a place of exchange and relations between different types of users, both long and medium stay patients and the museum visitors. The set of planned works aims to reward the environmental quality of the complex, also in relation to its surroundings and the vast dimension of the city. Thus, the plan to enrich the vegetation in the open spaces is intended to solicit a permanence that goes beyond its perception as a waiting space or distracted crossing. For therapeutic functions, the use of the cloister of Santa Maria delle Grazie is proposed alongside the use of the large medical garden with its courtyard designed by the existing structure and the new volume of this transept. This place directly accessible from the living quarters functions as an intermediate space between the city and the complex. And the work on the ruin of the arm collapsed as a result of the bombing of the Second World War and the 1980 earthquake is an opportunity to build a new front scene of the hospital in the urban imagination. The long sleeve of the ruined arm is located into an extraordinary position in relation to the city. The value of this location is emphasized by the upward trajectory of the urban ramp that reaches the access level of the entire complex on the north front. From here, a great crepidine materializes, sinking its roots into the lowest elevation of the city. In the verticality of the architecture of this great wall face, the objective dimension of the building is completely absent, and instead the unity and coherence of the design between architecture and the city emerges. A unity that results in an unusual and extravagant plastic effect. The building becomes a urban landscape. And this large covered space is dominated on the inside by an architectural promenade running through it in all directions, accompanying the visitor in a panoptic perception of the works of art selected to inhabit the space, based on the theme of relationship between the care of the body and the care of the soul. So inside this large crepidine, a triple height hall becomes the actual foyer serving the therapy center. In it, all volumetric aspirations are dampened and a large barbaric mass emerges, engraved by scarification of the material and softened by an implicit use of decorative action, which brings about an almost baroque metamorphosis. The process adopts a compositional principle alien to any functionalist determination and complementary to that which dominates the landscape of the necropolises that inhabit Naples underground, an indefinable space which implies sensitive coverings linked to the climate and the light of the Mediterranean. So we go through the third project that I want to show you. There are 4 in total, and this is a personal project that I conducted independently as a part of the doctoral seminar directed by Orazio Carpenzano, where the theme of the heritage is declined in its most immaterial sense, because it's a project intended as a research product of a very specific theme in the great discourse on heritage, but still, I believe, worthy of attention. That is how a house inhabited by a great artist can have the opportunity to be transformed into a museum and a place of cultural production, however modest the building itself may be. In this case study, I refer to the project for the transformation of the house of the poet Valentino Zaiken in a house of poetry, which Rome does not have to date. And nomadic by genetic inheritance, but sedentary de facto, Zaiken was born in Rijeka, the city then known as Fiume, in 1938. But following the exodus of the Istrian people, he moved with his mother Evelina and his father, a gardener, first to Parma, then to Rome, where he lived in perfect balance between these two apparently opposite conditions of precariousness of permanence, from his youth until his death in July 2016. Now recognized as one of the greatest Italian poets of the 20th century, defined by Alberto Moravia as a contemporary Marshall, Zaiken lived for the most part of his life in a house intended as a prothesis of itself, inhabited by books and very few objects of daily use, totally turned inside out and stripped of every superfluous element, in which the poet, as in Thoreau's famous aphorism, defines his richness in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone. These last words today, I bet they resonate with renewed value. The pandemic that has swept the world has exacerbated the condition of contemporary living in a time suspended in the perfect dichotomy between hyperconnectedness and self-isolation. The house as a shelter is transformed into a place of stay rather than a place to return to, an enclosure that hybridizes the place of life and that of work, a syncretic element of accumulation of objects and tools of affection. As for Johnson's house in London, our homes can be intended as places of stratification of rituals, objects, and artworks. The house can be considered as a multi-temporal space in which affects coexist as the first step of our sociality. In a game of references and reminders, the house welcomes figures from the past, even belonging to different imaginaries, which compose a kind of archive of memory that can be reinterpreted through the imaginations, as the engravings of Giovan Battista Piranesi. In Charles Eisen's allegorical representation for Abbot Lejeun's treatise, the primitive hut becomes the original landscape, the structural and aesthetic principle of the architecture itself. The theme of the house as a refuge thus highlights the dichotomous relationship between domestic and public space, observed from the place of isolation. The image that the world gives us back is filtered by the means that our altered perception allows us. This image, losing all relationship with matter, sublimates into a horizon in which the senses and the progressive time give way to the imagination and the memory of cyclical time. And the title of this communication, Fantastic for the Shelter, takes its cue from the theme of the memory and its preeminent role in the imaginative and creative process. As Novalis states, if there were a theory of the fantastic, like there is in the case of logic, then we would be able to discover the art of invention. From this intuition of Novalis in the 70s of the last century, Gianni Rodari will take inspiration to get the trail of some methodological clues concerning the birth of new stories condensed into his masterpiece, The Grammar of Fantasy, an introduction to the art of inventing stories. So this paradigm of the house as shelter and thus as a place of accumulation and fantasy is perfectly embodied by the house of Valentino Zaiken, who was at the same time a sort of hermit obsessed with his words, and a man endowed with extraordinary worldliness. As Marco Pietrosanto stated, the identification of the overlap between author and character, the conception of life as a work of art, finds one of the greatest formalization in the house. The house is functional to renew the poet's conception of the world, who observes the evolution of things from an archetypal space and such immutable. The author's irony and anti-releases are projected into this space that becomes a sort of heterotopia, another yet concrete place. The house shack represents the refusal to market rules, to force labor. It's the symbol of the maximum exercise of intellectual freedom. The shape of the house is the exact figure through which is possible to understand the refusal and the attraction towards the consumerist society that pervades Zaken's work and which finds a sort of iconology in his collages. This ideological character has determined a situationalist lifestyle as a wandering intellectual. The refusal of the dwelling as a representation of accumulation of things is replaced by the idea of the house as a place in which to accumulate knowledge. The house becomes a college made with the tools necessary for the construction of his poetics. The idea of preserving the memory of the poet through the designation of Roman home in a place dedicated to poetry arises from the spontaneous and collective proposal of a group of Roman intellectuals, above all Franco Purini and Zaken's daughter Marta, and was relaunched by the Faculty of Architecture of Sapienza through the Department of Architecture and Design and the Department of History, Design and Restoration of Architecture. In a doctoral seminar coordinated by Orazio Carpenzano, 9 students, including myself, were asked to imagine the transformation of the poet's house into a house of poetry. The results has been shown at the Biennale of Arte 2017 in Venice and in a dedicated event held at the Casa dell'Architettura in Rome on 14th of February, St. Valentine's Day of 2018. Carpenzano and his collaborators, who were Paolo Marco Aldi and Marco Pietrosanto, suggested a new destiny for the Zaken house shack, transforming these cramped domestic spaces into the smallest and most precious piece within the circuit of cultural institutions that insist along the founding axis of Rome, the Via Flaminia. In continuity with the Roman Philharmonic Academy, the Maxi, the Auditorium Parco della Musica, the National Gallery of Modern Art, and the Faculty of Architecture itself. The house is in fact located in Borghetto Flaminio, one of the mythical places in Rome, which rises a few meters from Piazza del Popolo within a urban fabric made of illegal small building settlements, still surviving the advent of the compact city of the 20th century, consisting of small industrial artifacts now in disuse and partially under reconversion by our own faculty into spaces for teaching and researching. This area is dominated by the slopes of the cliff of the slow-fed villa, which still today retain those primitive characteristics of the Etruscan Roman landscape that so much fascinated Goethe and Stendhal. Here, the huge strength of the large masses of tuff carved by the waters govern the morphology of a territory made up of sudden and dramatic changes in altitude. The house shack is a single-story rectangular volume of extremely small dimensions of about 5 by 15 meters, an arm of a settlement system that can be defined as a collective courtyard. In fact, the house is part of a square of 16 meters on each side, organized around an open space overlooked by 2 houses. The house, like many in this place, arose spontaneously and was occupied by Zaken towards the end of the 60s, in analogy to the reappropriation practices widespread among the artists of the Roman cultural milieu, of which Zaken was actively part. Valerio Magrelli's definition of casa baracca, house shack, appears to be the most consistent to describe this object. The building, although based on the archetype of the courthouse, is characterized by a certain constructive fragility. The temporary nature of its constructive elements suggests a makeshift shelter, a refuge that must fulfill its essential function, while the city becomes the true social and cultural home of the poet. The inevitable term of comparison of the seminar was the complete renovation project of the Zeichen House, developed by Emilio Puglielli and presented in the Venice Biennale in 1991. An ideal home for a Dadaist client, developed up to the executive scale and clearly inspired by Pierre Charot's Maison de Verre. The final project of the PhD seminar, as stated by Paolo Marcoaldi, show design strategies that are heterogeneous in form and function. Some consider the house as a ruin. The pre-existence is reduced to the archaeology of the built, simulacrum of a metaphysical space, an object suspended between the dreamlike dimension, reverie of impossible times and spaces. The house, frozen in its precarious condition, can become an expedient for possible overwritings or a sort of planned catastyllosis in which the dwelling loses its cover and the enclosure becomes a Dadaist ready-made. And my project for the House of the Poetry moves from the intention to define the space of imagination through an indefinite and labile boundary. A stereometric structure defines a perfectly cubical space that is rarefied air, as Zeichen said. This ephemeral work of elevation of the house rewrites its destiny and role in the Borghetto landscape, restoring a measure in height that defines a figure that is both peremptory and elusive, and which is able to compete with the scale of the elements of the surrounding urban, anthropic, and natural landscape. The result is an implicit homage to a glorious, albeit small, work of a great Roman architect, the Agip service station in Mestre by Costantino Dardi, which in the loss of the acrylic sheets that covered it, today shows the elegant and diaphanous texture of the spatial grid of its own structure, which makes it look like an empty aviary capable of only of occupying a portion of space or a rarefied air, as the poet called it. In this inventive operation, in which memory once again plays a fundamental role in the imaginative trigger, and by adopting a purely experimental method, which sees in the project the natural outcome of a theoretical and critical research work applied to architecture, the proposal works by subtraction and addition to the now inert matter of the house without any owner, which releases the pages of Zeichen's dream book into the rarefied space of his imprint. This aviary for verses, which embodies and stages the isolation and the desire for sharing that every artistic operation expresses and yearns for, where the paper seems to take a life on its own by means of an immanent act of attending a poetic will. In the definition of the figure, the clear geometry of the square shape is corrupted and contrasted by the myriad of diagonals generated by triangular submodels, according to the methods of regular decomposition of the space that, from the Roman floors in Opus Sectile, runs through the history of the figurative arts and through Ani Albert's reaches us. In the house, different types of encounter with poetry are allowed. In the central court, carved under the big tree, one can gather in groups to listen to readings aloud. On the cover of the low-fuel volume, you can lie down or sit down and read alone, in pairs or small groups, in front of the Pyrenean cliff scenery. Going down a spiral staircase, you arrive into a vaulted hypogeum, a think tank where you can be completely immersed in silence, as in a room of sensory deprivation. The area of the house shack is transformed into an open-air garden, which below has a small museum of Valentino Zagheny's works, accessible by stairs and a lift from the reception area and ticket office. On the opposite side of the central courtyard, a literary cafeteria, toilet, and a hall for indoor performances complete the equipment of the House of Poetry. The result is an architecture deprived of any tinsel, addition, or artifice to discover the primitive and timeless dimension of reading and meeting with others. In a game of references and reminders, the aviary welcomes figures from the past, even belonging to different imaginaries, which compose a kind of archive of memory. The theme of the house museum is hybridized with that of the space for the production and dissemination of art. Poetry thus becomes the means by which to embrace humanity from the enclosure of one's refuge, and the house shack assumes the role of a Hegelian concrete universal, which connects many oppositional diptychs linked to Rome, and its meaning for our own civilization, physical and intangible heritage, great history and micro-stories, solemn and popular lexicons, nomadism and permanence, memory and the future. And this one is the last project I want to tell you about that concerns a large feasibility study involving Sapienza, again under the direction of Orazio Carpenzano, for the energy, architectural and functional recovery and regeneration of the large building di Torbella Monaca. The building is located in the eastern outskirts of Rome, just off the Grande Raccordo Anulare, which is the road infrastructure that encompasses the urban layout, connecting the various routes of the radial transport system that has linked Rome with the whole Europe since antiquity. The building is a part of an ambitious social housing plan implemented in the early 1980s to meet the housing demand of large sections of the Italian population unable to buy a house at market prices. And as you can see, this large redom, designed by Pietro Barucci according to the theoretical principles expressed by Le Corbusier, is located into a frontier territory between the city, which presses behind it, and the Roman countryside, towards which the complex looks out through the three large courtyards, open into the landscape that looks to the Alban Hills and the Apennine Mountains. And this large building, designed to accommodate around 5,000 people, bears witness to the ideology that failed when it ran up against the difficulty of making the spaces on the ground and roof levels work as engines of sociality. Today, the complex is a space of severe degradation and is considered the city's largest drug den. The general program prepared by Sapienza interdisciplinary team aims to set up an ambitious green regeneration project for both the building and the open spaces, and to encourage a rebirth of the urban complex civic sense by intervening first of all on the ground floor through a typological work of inversion and parcellizing of the accesses of the dwellings, and one that brings together architecture and landscape to redefine the relationships between the building body, its front on the main road, and those on the three large courtyards open towards the landscape. These correctives in this specific case stem from a reconsideration of the building's ground floor with a view to constructing a new sort of intervisibility between inside and outside, between the front of Via dell'Archeologia and the Agro Romano, trying to make the basement completely transparent and intercepting within it sensitive points through which to define the accesses and make them become passages capable of reuniting the public space of the street with the protected space of the courtyards. The morphological order of the north courtyard is rewritten by a ground plan that predisposes the open space to a greater interaction with the city and the neighborhood, recognizing its potential role as a strategic fulcrum for urban regeneration, where the demands for sociality and sharing are reflected in new functions serving the community. This courtyard houses the headquarters of RIF, the Museo delle Periferie, the Museum of the Suburbs, conceived and directed by Giorgio De Finis. The architectural project places the new building body below the green walkway of the courtyard, which is hollowed by 3 large patios, each based on a pure geometric figure, the circle, the rectangle, and the square. Stereometric metal frames rivet their perimeters and raise these profiles, transforming them into volumes devoid of matter. The museum spaces become the radical apparatus of the existing residential settlements. The foundations of the large house, an until intended as a place symbolically dedicated to cooperation. The museum does not interfere with the perspective towards the Roman Ager, the Campagna Romana. It has no development incubator and seeks out a visual continuity between Via dell'Archeologia and the countryside, interrupted exceptionally by a few signs, special frames that, like reticular landmarks, identify the position of 3 craters that invite us underground. The combination of these 3 elements on the architectural still life of the green plane is functionally measuring and defining the open spaces of the courtyard, rebalancing its scalar relationship with the imposing building mass of the Rodin building designed by Pietro Barucci, and mediating the transition between the imposing verticality of the architecture and the open horizontality of the landscape of the countryside opening towards the east. The patios, thus configured, become mixed-use sunken gardens, providing multiple accessibility and the necessary lighting to the underlying room of the reef and the city house. In addition to rooms dedicated to the museum exhibition, the museum also houses a cafeteria, a bookshop information point, and workshops that, together with the music rehearsal rooms of the Casa della Città, aim to define the new intervention as a space open to multiple creativity, recognizing the capacity of artistic production to foster social cohesion and offer possible new perspectives to the inhabitants of the neighborhood and the city. The project recognizes the periphery, in the periphery, the habitat for the emergence of a new idea of culture, inclusive, collaborative, dialogic, open to the future, thanks to that vitalistic charge that has always characterized frontier spaces. The Reef is the first museum beyond Rome's Grande Raccolta Anulare, and for this reason, it also acquires a symbolic significance of the great interest. It is an experiment that aspires to be a reference point for the entire city, that proposes itself as an exportable enzymatic body, and as such finds the possibility not so much of reproducing the exact same model, but starting from that enzyme manages to diversify with respect to different contexts, immersing itself in a specific reality such as that one of Bella Monaco. Okay, that's all. Thank you. And any question is welcome. I hope it could be interesting for you. I think especially because I think through this project, I tried to show you how heritage is a complex matter and works on different levels, both on monuments, but also on immaterial modern monuments, also modern monsters, such as the Tor Bella Monaca one, but also on immaterial level of this transfer of culture and memories and knowledge and ideas from one generation to another. So thank you, Alessandro, Osge, and the students, if you want to ask any questions.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you
Yeah.
turn off the echo. You need to turn off the audio there. Echo. Okay, thank you very much for this illuminating presentation. Before we open the floor for discussion and questions, I would like to specifically thank you for remembering Giovanni Carbonara, who he was, and how he is important for us. That is the reason why we have dedicated our virtual classroom to him. And this is not only today, throughout the semester, our virtual classroom is entitled to him. Since the pandemic, when we went online, every year we're dedicating a classroom to somebody. We had Canicia, we had Seddad, Kieldem, we had Boni, every year we're picking somebody important. And so this semester we're honoring the memory of Giovanni Carbonara, who was one of my professors and also a very close friend, I should say. And then I would just want to say three words about the project. So these are very different projects, different styles, if you wish, different contexts, different places, but they have something in common, all of them, in my opinion. And these are keywords: modification, fantasy, and figure. So all these examples we have seen are the modification of something that is already there. They're not ex abrupto. They're not built on nothing. They're built as a modification of an existing artifact. That's very important. And today, this is what we need to do. We need to recycle existing buildings and transform them rather than building new stuff. So I do appreciate that. I want to underline. And then this role of fantasy or fantastic, that's the citation, as opposed to logic. Well, opposed, as parallel to logic. So logic has its own structure, demonstrating things through axioms. That's the way science is built. But no matter how good you might be in science, you cannot do a painting with that. That logic is not going to make you do a painting or a portrait or compose a piece of music or write a poetry or design a building, a beautiful building. So there's another person out there, if logic is on one side, which is fantastic, or another discipline or another art or another magic, whatever you want to say, a power. And architecture is somewhere in between the two. There's a little bit of fantastic, a little bit of logic, and that's the reason why we do have here our invention poster as the first exercise. That is fantastic. There's nothing rational behind the invention poster. It's just a pure expression of your creative, ideas. Third, figure. So all these examples are exploring the configuration of the space through figures, or I should say meaningful figures, which appear suddenly in the elevation and the plan and the perspective and the 3D model. Those figures tend to assume a meaning which is above the level of the construction as a standalone. They tend to assume a meaning which is supraliteral, above the written meaning. There's a hidden meaning in these architecture, or there's an attempt in creating a hidden meaning. And so we can have levels of interpretation, hermeneutic explanation of the architectural figure as a whole. And this is what I wanted to underline: modification, fantastic, and figure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anyone else wants to pose a question, please do this. I will have to now, I'm sorry, leave because I have a running assembly on the iPad. But thank you very much, Fabio.
Well, thank you, Alessandro. And yes, I totally agree with, and thank you for this comment. And I want to stress this point because that you stated, architecture is made by logic and fantasy. In logic, 1 plus 1 is 2. By using fantasy, 1 plus 1 must give 3, not 2. Okay, this is very important, and it's very important to balance these two levels of design, fantasy with logic, to create good architectures.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Amima, thank you for this really beautiful presentation. Every presentation that we watch, you made for us was really a visual feast for us. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Of course, I can send you the presentation, so you can share in a better way with it with your students.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I see that. Thank you very much for your presentation for today. So I think we're going to we'll be stopping the recording.
Can I see the classroom?
Yeah, sure.
How many are you?
We have 4 students inside of the classroom, and we have the rest of the audience online.
Okay. Hi. Enjoy Istanbul. Okay. So anyway, if you receive some questions after the lesson, you can send me, and I will be happy to answer. Okay. Thank you for the invitation again, and I hope to see you again in the near future, also in person.
We do. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.